It's a high school prank that backfired bigly and confusingly. Just before graduation, Kaylin Scheel, a senior at Truman High School in Independence, Missouri, placed this ad on Craigslist. It offers the school for sale for less than $13,000 and lists such amenities as playing fields, central air, a nearby Walmart, and a huge parking lot for those looking to party. Obvious joke, right? The worst you can say about it is that there were a lot of misspellings for a soon-to-be high school graduate. But that's not how his school chose to view it. Instead, Scheel was suspended for the last few days of school and forbidden from participating in his graduation ceremony. At issue? Apparently this line in the ad, quote, reason for sale due to the loss of students coming up. In this era of rampant school shootings, the school chose to view this as a threat. But what Scheel meant was that the school would be missing all the seniors who were graduating. The ACLU took on Scheel's case, but a judge ruled in the school's favor, and Kaylin did not get to participate in his diploma ceremony. Was that the right call? The case was brought to my attention via a blog post by my next guest. You know Jonathan Turley. He's a professor of law at George Washington University and a constitutional scholar. Professor, I had to reread the ad 3 times because that line never jumped out at me.
Well, it's because you're clueless. You don't realize that Al-Qaeda often, their new tactic is to sell high schools at a discounted price. That's apparently the new terrorist threat in America. You know, the problem with this, Michael, is that it is not unique. As I mentioned on the blog, there's a series of cases now where the first response, as opposed to last response, is to call police. You know, in Arizona, you had a kid who was charged with 69 indecent exposure charges because of a prank photo he took with his football team. In Missouri, you had a kid who faced criminal charges because he snuck the word masturbate into the final draft of a yearbook. In Indiana, a kid was arrested because he snuck into school to put blow-up dolls in the girls' bathroom. And so what we're having is this sort of CYA trend. You know, everyone just calls the police, gives these kids a criminal record for stuff that used to be basically the subject of a student-parent meeting. And that's what's so disturbing about this. You know, the school says, look, we called police out of an abundance of caution. It was really a sort of a shockingly sharp lack of humor that led to this.
Sounds like the Delta House legacy is secure. Let me ask you this, from a legal standpoint. So, okay, the ACLU get involved, a TRO is sought. What was the issue for the federal judge?
Well, here's the problem, Michael, and you're familiar with this yourself, is that the Supreme Court has made a mess out of free speech for students. And the issue for the judge was that the ACLU said, look, this was not a threat. No logical being would view this as a threat of any kind. And so he was being disciplined because it was embarrassing or annoying to the school. Now, in 1969, the court, in really the high point of free speech rights for students, said in a case called Tinker that you can't discipline students for things that are not disruptive, things that are not really interfering with the school's mission. That, unfortunately, was the high point. After that, the Supreme Court continually rolled back on students' rights. The worst moment came 10 years ago in a case called Morris, the so-called Bong Hits for Jesus case. This was a case where a kid standing outside of school, he hadn't even gone to school that day, held up a sign saying Bong Hits for Jesus as the Olympic torch passed by. And the Supreme Court said, no, of course they can discipline that student.
Look, it's I'm laughing at it because I think all the ones that we have that you've identified are so obvious. I applaud the school's vigilance, but what they're lacking is common sense. I mean, they need somebody in the room like you, Professor Turley, who could say, "My God, it's a joke."
Well, that's the terrible thing. Is not just that we've lost this sense of humor, but you're doing really rotten things to these kids. You know, you're arresting them, you're giving them criminal records. In this case, this kid couldn't be at his graduation. That might seem like a trivial issue for some people, but it's not. I mean, that kid spent 4 years and wanted to graduate with his friends. And a bunch of school officials decided that they were going to punish him because they were annoyed. That strikes me as violating a fundamental obligation you have to your students. And I think that the officials should be held accountable here. But nothing's going to happen until the public says, all right, look, there's a difference between protecting our schools and doing this type of nonsense where our kids are being subject to arrests and police questioning. I mean, we can't surgically implant humor into school officials, but we can hold them accountable.
Final question. Is there anything on the horizon for the Supreme Court that could change this, the case law that you've cited?
I got to tell you, I am not optimistic. Look, I'm not trashing this judge. The judge had the case precedent that the Supreme Court created. But even liberals on the court are not good on this issue. You know, Sotomayor, when she was a Court of Appeals judge, signed on to a really notorious case where she said that a student could be disciplined for stuff that she wrote on social media outside of the school. So there's just this disconnect on the Supreme Court, and the loss is free speech. We're raising our students not only in this fishbowl of surveillance, but also in this really sort of censorship-rich environment. And what type of citizens are they going to become if they believe that they can't speak freely?
Professor Turley, thank you as always.
Thanks, Michael.
Apologies for my sophomoric humor, but you should know what you're dealing with. I was suspended in the 9th grade for mooning. Look it up, kids.